for joining us. This is Comic Books This Week with Dr. Stanford Carpenter and myself, Hannibal Tabu, the head comics reviewer at Bleeding Cool. We're going to go over what came out this week, what we thought of it, and whether or not you should probably buy it. Normally, I look at these books from a rating of either buy, honorable mention, meh, or no, just no, and Stanford's scale is somewhere like that. So let's just say it's the same scale because, like him, I'm going to just take credit for stuff I didn't do. So,
well, instead of no, just no, I say, oh, the humanity.
See, if there's anything I'd like to avoid, it's humanity. All right, where should we begin on our adventure into something? Our journey into whimsy, or I don't know what we're calling
it. I don't know. I mean, one thing that I decided to get, that I picked up the first issue, and the second issue, which just came out today, was Jupiter's Legacy Requiem.
It's interesting you mention that because Image did not feel strongly enough about that to include it with their review copies. I normally get review copies of most of the Image books, but I've noticed that I never get Walking Dead, and this book did not show up, which I was like, huh, that's interesting. They must not. What are they trying to hide?
Well, it's actually, you know what? Here's the thing. I feel like with Jupiter's Legacy, it is that there's some sort of discord there, because it's like the Netflix show. It wasn't as great as people want it to be, but it was good enough that I wanted to see a second season. I
Really?
could see, yeah, I could see some things in there. I'm like, okay, this is one of those things where I felt like they really failed to adapt the book into our time. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, and I think that is actually the most important thing. If you're doing a movie or television of a comic book, pretty much it's going to be of a comic book story that's at least 10 years old by the time you go through the production process and everything, right?
Fair.
So you're going to have to update it. It doesn't matter how current and how interesting the storyline is when it comes out. Part of the major part of the adaptation process is taking it into this time. Like for example, 10 years ago, there had been no Me Too movement.
Oh.
Right? So think of any comics that are being adapted right now. Right? I mean, because Me Too was really about 5 years ago, right? I mean, I'm just saying, it's like 10 years ago, George Floyd hadn't happened, right? Yeah. These are all things that are like categorical cultural shifts that change the way we read a story, and that's the game for when you're adapting a comic book to another media form, is first updating it for the time. And I think a good example, and why I bring up Me Too is look at The Boys, yeah. Right? What The Boys managed to do was take a comic that was incredibly irreverent, and if you read the comic through a Me Too lens, was a Me Too nightmare, and actually turn around and adapt it in such a way in which it was able to adeptly address Me Too.
Yes.
Right? And in some ways, the Me Too movement made that series stronger, not weaker.
Okay.
You know, so and so that's where Jupiter's Legacy kind of dropped the ball. They tried to
the show.
The show. Okay. Tried to incorporate some diversity, and they did it in a way that just felt incredibly flat, and felt incredibly flat in part because George Floyd had happened. Mm-hmm. Like if we had gone to a pre-George Floyd sensibility, I think it would have been okay. I'm not saying it would have been great, but it would have been okay the way they did it. And in this case, we're talking about making the only black character, in the present, be the character who's been horribly maimed and injured, and just having him saddle a lot of that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. There were some better ways to deal with it, and I think that and it's not just post George Floyd, but post Lovecraft Country and post Watchmen.
Yep.
Right? Like that way of inserting diversity doesn't work. It just doesn't work, because those are all examples that showed a way of dealing with diversity that was much more syncretic with popular culture notions of history and popular culture historical deficits. right?
Okay. So the book that you've got on hand now, where is that? What's happening here?
Well, the issue with the book, I feel a similar kind of discord. I feel like what's happened is that Requiem is the third part of the arc, right?
Yeah.
And so what's happened is this third part, at least the two that I'm reading, have not. I don't. First of all, there's two problems. One, as a new reader coming onto it, it doesn't really explain enough, right?
Okay.
So I feel like it's a little hard to manage and have a better sense of who's related to who and why it matters, right?
Yes.
When you're doing a trilogy like this, you really do need to have a previously before you step into the last part.
Strong
Especially
recap.
especially when there's been over a decade between the first one and the last one, right? So that hurts it. But I also felt like there was something about the way the narrative was functioning on the same on the sensibilities of a decade ago as opposed to the sensibilities of now.
Well, that doesn't sound like something you want to be picking up at the store there. But yeah, I mean,
I look. I've read two issues. Maybe he'll right the ship. That's my critique of it. But the thing is, I'm a little more forgiving of that in a comic, in part because it is a continuation of something that came back then, right? It's kind of like when we read the Alan Moore's original Watchmen or V for Vendetta or or if we go back a little further, we go to Dark Knight, Frank Miller's Dark Knight, right? We don't necessarily, we do a little bit of bracketing where we don't hold it and we don't make it entirely beholden to today's sensibility. We kind of accept that it's connected to something of yesteryear,
they're period
right?
pieces.
Right. So I accept a little, so I give it a little more wiggle room there, but the thing is, in the comic book, it is kind of noticed. And I'm not sure, and it leaves me with the sense of I'm not sure how to interpret it. I'm going to give it I'm not going to say don't buy this. What I am going to say is, this is kind of like, it's not like run to your store, buy now, would be kind of the next level down. It is it's worth getting if it's something that you're predisposed to be interested in. Because I think that there is something that they're trying to play out that could be cool.
It's much more forgiving than I would be, but I respect that. This is Comic Books This Week with Dr. Stanford Carpenter, comic book anthropologist, and myself, Hannibal Tabu, the head comics reviewer at Bleeding Cool. We're talking about this week's output of books. He just went through some Jupiter's Legacy, which Image did not feel like they should send out to their reviewers, which hey, that's the decision you're making. So, where would you like to go next, Stanford?
I guess sometimes it's good to get the trash out of the way.
Let's do it.
Shazam.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Extreme Carnage, but okay, yeah, let's talk about Shazam, sure.
I mean, here's the thing. I love me a Shazam story.
I love
I'm
Shazam.
partial to Shazam, and I have grown particularly fond of Black Adam before they announced the movie. Back when he came in as an anti-hero in the Justice League, and you're talking to the guy who is not a big fan of anti-heroes, right?
Okay.
And you've heard me talk about that a lot. Now, the thing is, I felt like I went to a comic book shop and I purchased a book that has Shazam on the cover. I see a lightning bolt. I see 1, 2, 3 lightning bolts on the cover.
Yeah, you do.
One behind the Shazam logo, one up in the corner under DC, one on Shazam's hulking chest.
Yeah.
And what I got was a Teen Titans Academy story, and I'm not a fan of Teen Titans Academy.
So you'd
in
say
fact,
this wasn't very striking, perhaps?
Here's the thing. I would give you a hard time for such a bad pun, but the badness of your pun is still greater than the reading experience.
Okay. When I read it, here's my beef, okay? It's a Shazam book, right? There's very little actual Shazam in it. Billy in costume, using his powers, the whole thing is based around I can't be Shazam. So it's not really a Shazam book, it's a I can't be Shazam book, which functionally, is lamer. Especially because one of the things that they've done to Billy Batson in aging him up to being a teenager now is that they have also made him less wholesome, less good, more smarmy, more of a kind of a jerk a little bit, honestly. And that Billy Batson not being as wholesome, not being as kind and whatnot, is less interesting to read. I'm shocked to say. It played off worse in the film. It was the weakest element of the film because Zachary Levi was amazing in the title role, but and it plays much more weakly here. I do feel like you got a switcheroo depending on what was on the cover based on what was in the book. There's not a lot of Shazam in this book, and that's a major letdown.
Well, I'm going to say this. When you've got somebody named Billy walking around in their little orange Titans Academy getup, it's not really Billy Batson.
True.
I feel like that's like the student that's like a third character. He doesn't start to become, even the smarmy version of Billy Batson until like the last 3 pages of the story where he puts on his little red hoodie.
Yeah.
That's when I actually see him trying to be Billy Batson. The rest of the time but the rest of the time he's just being a petulant student, and he's looking in the world. Everything is seen through the problem, through student problems, and I think that's actually. I think that as I read this, I realized that part of what's going on here is this puts in high relief just how bad of a fit Shazam is with Teen Titans Academy.
Yes.
Like, he shouldn't be there.
Yes.
Because if you look at the character, he's, as Billy Batson, he's this child, and he embodies a sense of wonder that I think is incredibly important. And he's also, but even in the older versions, he's still a pretty cynical child, right? He gets how bad the world is. He's an orphan. He's running around trying to shill newspapers just to make it from day to day.
But
he gets it, right? And then what happens is then he becomes Captain Marvel, like as if becoming an adult somehow solves his problems, and he realizes what's built in the tension is that Shazam never solves Billy's problems.
No.
And that's the really interesting point of the character. Like that, like when I think about times when Shazam is interacting with the Justice League, and then they find out, oh my God, he's really a kid in a secret identity.
Yeah.
They're like shocked because because when he's Shazam, he's a kid with the wisdom of Solomon. I think that is what makes him an interesting character, is this sense of wish fulfillment where getting the wish does not solve your problems.
I totally agree. Yeah.
And aging him up and putting him in Titans Academy is really just the writer saying, we have no idea what to do with this character.
True.
Because there's just no way that Nightwing or Starfire have any meaningful advice to give to Billy Batson or to Shazam.
Yes. Yeah, especially given the responsibilities that he has. Because remember, he is tasked by the wizard to, first of all, be the protector of Earth. He's tasked to be the wizard's champion to fight against the forces of evil that are empowered by the 7 deadly sins, which is way out of the way out of the pay grade of Starfire or even Raven, honestly, even with her struggle with Trigon. It's way beyond their pay grade, let alone Nightwing. So you're right. First of all, nobody at Titans Academy has got anything to tell him about his job that could help him. Second, that with that responsibility in mind and with that power in mind, to make him a petulant teen, taking away the wholesomeness that literally made him a thing, is making the Black Adam mistake again. The whole Black Adam mistake was too old to begin the training, given him the power too late, and given into cynicism. And if you're really going to follow what the Shazam franchise has become, which is the cycle between man to hero, hero to wizard, wizard to god, if that's really the intent here, which it absolutely should be, then Billy Batson is on his road to being the villain and not the hero. He's on his road to screwing up the cycle for the second time, which would be over thousands of years, really poor pattern recognition.
Well, I'll take it one step forward. You
Come
can
through.
have the smarmy Billy Batson, but you need to put the smarmy Billy Batson in dialogue with and in contrast with this idealized Shazam who can't solve his problems.
Okay, I like that.
That's also interesting. But again, the thing is that I feel like we're in a moment where nobody wants to write wonder.
Yes,
And the DC universe is the world of wonder.
yes. Except they kill Wonder Woman. Anyway,
And if that's not if that doesn't totally encapsulate the problem, I don't know what does. I mean,
yeah.
I gotta say, I'm gonna still read it because I'm hoping against hope that like something interesting happens and it's a 4-issue miniseries.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm honestly I'm looking forward to the Black Adam movie. I'm
Yeah.
actually going to be doing a video podcast on Black Adam for the Oriental Institute at University of Chicago in a couple weeks,
Okay. Lots to
and
cover there.
yeah, well, and but it's because I'm really interested in how Shazam and Black Adam start off as these incredibly start off just enmeshed in incredible colonialist narratives,
Yep.
and literally embody in their struggle against one another because Shazam is the Greco-Roman pantheon of gods, and Black Adam is actually the Egyptian pantheon of gods.
Yep.
So when they fight, they're bringing those pantheons against each other, and Shazam always wins. So like even there at the level of just conflict between the two of them is also a colonial statement. And so to see the characters come out of that, and then to see where the characters are now, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, it's like you said about A Man Among You last week. Identity plays into it. That looking at who people are informs what they do and how that is affected and how that is read. So yeah,
Exactly,
I totally see what you're talking about there.
because who you are affects what power is in your hands.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just that simple.
Yeah, I personally would have to call this one a meh, which would be like the third tier down from buying. It's not all the way to being terrible, but I'm not gonna lie, like I wasn't super disappointed. So, yeah.
I mean, yeah, I agree with you on Matt. I mean, the fact that I'm reading it, I'm gonna keep reading it. I don't necessarily recommend that other people read it because I don't want you coming at me like I stole your money because I kind of will have if I told you to.
That's real talk. This is Comic Books This Week with Dr. Stanford Carpenter and myself, Hannibal Tabu. We have covered Shazam. We have covered Jupiter's Legacy. What do we got next up?
Well, let's stay with the let's stay with the world of wonder. Superman and the Authority.
Yeah. Now, about this, I had some questions because this, like the new Mr. Miracle book, seems like it's like continuity. What's continuity? Because you have Superman with JFK starting the book, and now he's older and running out of gas, but it's still the Manchester Black who had a lot of conflicts against Superman. So I'm not really sure what they're trying to say about where this is supposed to go, or if this is just like one of those Austin Powers. Don't worry about it, Austin. Just enjoy yourself. And that goes for you too, looking at the audience. I'm not sure if that's what's happening here or whatever, but the idea of Superman recruiting the worst possible people to try to, because he feels he failed with the Justice League to accomplish what he needed to do, kind of feels like an indictment of Superman on one hand, which Grant Morrison in his drug-filled, sort of way definitely could be doing. I don't know, but it also feels like giving up in some ways. That we tried to be good, and that's really, if you look at your Marjorie Taylor Greens and your Matt Getzes, that's really fits with the zeitgeist of the times. This giving up on the concept of being good and just saying, let's just get it done. That's honestly a Superman that's less attractive to me in a lot of ways. If he doesn't if I don't believe a man can fly, because he apparently is having problems with that, then I sure as heck won't believe that he's here for truth, justice, and anything else.
Well, and it's also, I mean, it's also kind of a weird, subtle reference to impotence, right?
Ooh,
Like
yeah,
he used to be able to fly, now he can only float 6 inches above the ground. Like he's lost his potency.
yeah.
I, I mean, from what I understand, and some of the things I've read about this book is that this was written before Dan DiDio left, and that this was supposed to fit. I mean, the original idea, and that this was supposed to fit into that whole next gen thing. So if you think of it in a world where where he's already passed the reign to, you know what I mean, like because we know the next gen was kind of similar to future state. So
Yes.
if you think of this in that context, this makes complete sense, right?
So this is after he's
Because
passed the torch to John.
yeah,
Okay.
but it still doesn't quite make sense when you have him talking with Jack Kennedy. It just doesn't. You're right, on a continuity level, it doesn't make sense right now. I'm just thinking of it as an Elseworld story, and hoping that they find that Grant Morrison finds some way to loop it back. I also read that Grant Morrison was saying that this is going to be his last comic book for a really long time because he's
That might
going
be a
on
good
to other
idea.
types of writing. I mean, I just don't know. I don't know how to place this, and I don't know who to place the blame on. Now that I know, once I read that most of this was thought up before Dan DiDio left.
Yeah.
And which actually makes me wonder why they even bothered to publish it. Like a lot of this stuff, I get it. Like that they had paid a lot of people to make some stuff
Hmm.
for this thing that Dan DiDio wanted to do. At least that's my understanding,
Yeah.
or that seems to be the general understanding. And if you're gonna get rid of what he did and you're not gonna make it happen, then publishing the stuff that fits into that other continuity that we're never gonna really see, it 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 feels like it feels like a money grab in the most inappropriate way.
Absolutely.
And because it's like we're just gonna put this out here and we're not gonna give you any sense of how to contextualize it. At least tell us, hey, this is an Elseworld story, or this is not in continuity, right? People don't have a problem with something not fitting in continuity if they know it's not supposed to fit.
Well, and that was the success of All Star Superman, which was the last time Grant Morrison took on Superman in a big way. And I believe, given the production values on this book, because you could see, the art, the this was not a cheap book to make. So
Right.
somebody need to make some money off of this book, one way or another. And if they can do that by working this product through and just getting it out to retailers, retailers will take one look at the art and see Grant Morrison's name and say, I'm going to buy 10 of these for my shop because
Right.
that's what people will buy. And if you multiply that times 2,500 diamond accounts, then you're getting into some actual books. I'm not sure if it'll actually, those numbers will bear out as we get there or whatever through the ICV2s, but that will be the theory behind it. I totally get it. Money Grab was a completely fair assessment, as any book in many ways is a gamble for money. It's the entertainment business, not the entertainment hobby. So that part, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, but if you're gonna grab the money out my pocket, at least rub my butt a little bit. I mean,
The X-Men have proven you don't have to bother.
if well, yeah. But I think that what would have been interesting also, and it's a format issue, is then just do it as a graphic novel and put it everywhere. People accept that graphic novels are outside of continuity. Again, there's nothing to here to signal where it belongs, and that's where the confusion comes in.
I totally agree. However, from a business standpoint, graphic novels are more expensive to make. And floppies, especially if you can trick people into buying a bunch of them, pay for themselves. They pay for the printed collection. And then you can keep the printed collection in print for as long as you want to do whatever you need to. Once it gets into something like Hoopla or the library system, then you're like, okay, this will pay for itself. We're not worried about it. But you got to get that first initial nut of money. And like I said, Grant Morrison ain't cheap. This art was not cheap, not with this degree of presentation. So, when you put all that together, you got somebody's got to eat that cost, and DC says it's the fans, and okay, that's a choice. It's not the one I would make, but it's a choice.
Well, I'll give it a meh.
I agree. I agree with that. What do you want to bounce to next? This is Comic Books This Week with Dr. Stanford Carpenter and myself, Hannibal Tabu, head comics reviewer at bleedingcool.com. And we've discussed Superman and the Authority. We've discussed Shazam. We've discussed Jupiter's Legacy. That's a whole bunch of flying people. What's next?
Okay, let's scooch over to Marvel and let's talk Moon Knight.
Moon Knight. Okay. I have a very specific perspective on this, but I'm curious to hear where you're going with it.
I gotta create a new category. What the fuck? There's a lot here to like. There really is, but they did I don't feel like they really did enough to tell me where this fits. It's not the same. It's not about where this fits in continuity, like the problem you have with Superman, but
yes.
But where this fits for the character. I feel like I've jumped into the middle of a story, and I haven't been given enough to be like, oh, I'll wait to be filled in.
Okay. I can.
So there.
Yeah.
So there's it's that level of confusion. It's I mean, a lot of the basic beats are honestly are really solid. I wish that and it's something where like I feel like this is something where where it could have been done with a little more exposition in panels, a little more upfront saying this is what's going on. Because Moon Knight's inherently a really confusing character.
Yes.
Whenever you have a main character with multiple personalities, you have to give people a little more exposition to help them figure out what has to do with the story, what has to do with the character and the character's multiple personalities.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And this writer, Jed MacKay, he's been very strong. He did a Taskmaster mini recently that was very strong, and he's been murdering it on Black Cat. He's been doing a fantastic job with that character. But I do believe here the underlying framework is a limitation that's causing him problems because there's so much to do. First of all, this book is a thematic sequel to the Warren Ellis book, which you can see by the new suit and the stylings that come through. It's based on that and the way he swoops down out of the sky. That's directly out of the Warren Ellis approach and to show things, a casual disregard for property damage and sometimes public safety. Those things are factored into that approach. Likewise, it follows directly the Jason Aaron story where Khonshu took over the entire world and stole Mjolnir and kicked the Panther God in the teeth and did all kind of ridiculous things that are completely out of the pay grade of Khonshu. All of this while never really addressing, as this book notes, the dichotomy and the dissonance between the idea of a person of the Jewish faith being asked to represent Egypt, an Egyptian god.
Right.
Those issues
that you can't.
Go ahead.
You can't brush that. I mean, they brush it off. They're like, he's like, well, I'm comfortable with the contradiction. It's like, sorry, as a reader, I'm not.
Yeah. And as for me, as somebody who practices ancient Egyptian spirituality, I'm certainly not. But a lot of times, Moon Knight has gotten by on style, gotten by on a lot more sizzle than steak. I'll put it that way. Or
right.
As we used to say when we were developers, all hat, no cowboy. When we see this character, we see the visuals, we see the effect, we see the noirish kind of look of the coloring and the art. And don't get me wrong, it looks great. This book is gorgeous. It looks fantastic. But in trying to, near the end, essentially develop two antagonists as a kind of a rogues gallery, because Moon Knight doesn't really have a rogues gallery, because nobody cares.
Oh, wow.
I mean, let's keep it real. Nobody cares about a third-rate bootleg Batman with dissociative identity disorder. It's just not. There was a big thing in a previous version where Moon Knight had three voices in his head at all times. He was either listening to Wolverine, Captain America, or Spider-Man, and they informed all his decisions. And they had little ethereal versions of them talking in his ear as he would go about doing things. And that was dumb. And this is dumb too, because with all the style and substance, style rather, and not substance, but sizzle of seeing, oh, welcome to the Midnight Mission. He's got a new catchphrase. He's got a stylish thing. That all looks great on paper, But if you scratch the surface, there's nothing underneath it. And for a writer like Jed McKay, he's trying to get you by on that, and I get that. But there's only so much he can do with the material at hand. Introducing, spoiler, one of his villains that directly contradicts everything that Mark Spector believes about Khonshu and about his power therein. It's a play, but only if you really plan to resolve something. We know that they don't plan to resolve something because we have a series to get to with Oscar Isaac in it. And people are going to love Oscar Isaac in it because Oscar Isaac's great. But Oscar Isaac also picks these super terrible characters that are completely unlikable when you look at them with even a little bit of scrutiny. and that goes for Duke Leto Atreides and for Poe Dameron, if you really look at it. So when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at what's on the page, and what's on the page is not popping. It's not giving me enough meat on this character to say, why should I be interested in your quest for justice in the name of a god that you yourself have abandoned and that you yourself don't care about what happens to? That's implausible.
And I think that's actually, from my perspective, I think that's the problem with Moon Knight. Is I think Moon Knight is visually one of the most interesting characters of all superheroes.
Yes.
Not just the Marvel Universe, period, right? And I think the idea of the Moon Knight identity being, the Fist of Khonshu, right? I think that the idea of a character that is steeped in and I'm going to say Egyptian cosmology, not mythology, cosmology.
Yes, sir.
Right? I think that's really interesting. That's a really interesting take, right? But once you go there, right, this is where identity matters.
Yes, sir. Oh, here, come on,
and it really truly matters, and that's where Mark Spector, who's also, I actually think Mark Spector is an interesting character in his own right.
Yeah.
He's an incredibly interesting character, but he's not an interesting Moon Knight.
Yes.
And I think that is the fundamental problem with this character. I mean, and the thing that's also interesting about him being a Fist of Khonshu is that since he is a cosmological avatar, right?
Yes.
What that opens the door to is Mark Spector does not have to be Moon Knight. And it could also be just as interesting, instead of having one white identified Jewish person having multiple personalities, what if you had multiple people take up the Fist of Khonshu and grapple with what that means? Mm-hmm. Right? It's a little bit about that, but they still keep what the history of the characters is. They keep Mark Spector sacred.
Yeah. Well, when you get a TV show coming, you got to do that.
Do you? They've killed Scarlet Witch, and they're killing Doctor Strange, and they're supposed to be alive in the movies.
Neither of us believe that they're going to really kill. Well, let me put it this way: neither of us believes they're going to Uncle Ben Scarlet Witch or Doctor Strange. Neither of us believes that, and nobody in their right mind would.
That's true. But what I'm saying is, we allow for a huge amount of discord between the movie and the comics
for a little while, not for any amount of time, not for even the space of a year.
But there's a way. But here's the thing: if Moon Knight is a cosmological avatar, he can be someone else for a while and then switch back to Mark Spector occasionally. I mean, but I guess what I'm really talking about here is that the Mark Spector that's been created is not up. At least I have yet to see a writer who is really up to the task of reconciling that gulf.
And let's talk about that, especially because, and I hate to bring this up, especially given Marvel's having Akira Yoshida in charge. To my knowledge, there's never been a person of color who's been in charge of writing Moon Knight. Guest appearances, other little moments, perhaps, but there's never, ever been a person of color, let alone a black person, let alone a person of this actual, even the ethnicity who is even Egyptian. I'm not even going to go all the way black. I would say never even somebody Arabic has written this character.
Right.
And it shows. This character is draped in white sensibilities, in white ideas, and in white aesthetics, literally down to the costume. And I mean, like you said, I really enjoy the visuals on the costume, which is why Mark Millar stole it for Nemesis. That's why he completely just sampled the entire look for Nemesis when he did that book. But that don't make it right. You know, I can
Right.
take
And
take
and
four
thi-
bars out of a lot of songs that are hot, but that don't make the original song hot.
and this comes back to the whole issue of identity, right?
Hmm.
Is this identity combined with this construct of a character, it's really hard to get outside of a blatantly colonial narrative.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not. Let me put it this way: either of us, if we were offered the check, could come up with the right idea to do it in a day. Either of us. And so could Brandon Easton, and so could David Walker, and so could Brandon Thomas, or Stephanie Williams, or N.K. Jemisin, or a whole bunch of other people. But they're not. Those
Right.
calls are not happening, and we all understand wholly why. This is Marvel's White Knight that they're going to keep to themselves.
And the irony is he's lesser for it.
Yeah.
I mean, and here's the thing. This is another book I am gonna read. It's a little better than meh, but what makes it hard is part of what I'm looking for is how are you gonna square that circle between the identity of the person who is Moon Knight and who Moon Knight is supposed to be. And that's always the problem with this character. And I hate harping on the problem, but I think you really need to. I mean, Moon Knight, in that way, Moon Knight's is very similar to what we talked about with Shazam and Black Adam. It's just that
Yeah.
somehow in Shazam and Black Adam, they've done a better job of dealing with it.
Well, I mean, historically, the answer has been they're not going to bother to square the round peg. They're just going to keep trying to hammer it in and call it a day. This would still be a meh for me because while I'm willing to look in on it, this is not good enough for me to say that there's enough good to outweigh the bad. It would be a tie game at best and maybe a little below that for me. So we've got about 20 minutes, a little 22 minutes left in our show today. This is Dr. Stanford Carpenter, myself, Hannibal Tabu, head comics reviewer at Bleeding Cool, and this is Comic Books This Week. We've covered Moon Knight, we've covered Shazam, we've covered Superman the Authority, and we've covered Jupiter's Legacy. What's next?
Well, let's get on to something that I want. I need a palate cleanser. I need to talk
Please.
about something that I enjoyed,
Yes, sir.
and something that I enjoyed from one of the big two,
Oh, okay. That's even harder,
and
but sure.
and that's Guardians of the Galaxy.
Okay, all right. You like Guardians of the Galaxy this week. Tell me about why.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I feel like what they're going for is a comfort food comic. In
Okay.
this, they've got some really interesting characters. They're not screwing up. I know that sounds really bad, but
Yeah.
but but they put together. They've actually, I feel like with this Guardians of the Galaxy, this iteration, they've put together something that is solid and workable. It's very much what I mean. They're literally saying it here, right? That they are what the Imperial Guard should be,
True.
right?
True.
And they are what and in this day and age, they're also what the Legion of Superheroes could be.
That part.
And they figured out a way of writing this large cast of characters that gives me enough of each to keep me interested. And more importantly, like when a character speaks, I'm like, oh, that is that character. I don't feel like
Yes.
the words are just interchangeable between the characters. Like this is good basic team writing.
True.
And but then they have some really interesting like character issues, like when Wiccan and Hulkling, they're working out, they're helping out together and they're doing these things that the royals aren't supposed to do. They're hanging out with the proletariat, and they realize that the Kree and the Skrull are both being attacked, and their first instinct, because they're a couple, is to stay together, and it's like, no, we can't, because we're royals. If we stay here, if we're both in the same place, it's going to look like we're favoring the Kree over the Skrull.
Yes.
And those are the two biggest factions. We got to separate. They kiss goodbye, and that's it. And what's and then they go to they're kind of going their separate ways. But you see that as an enduring tension because this is a couple. They want to be together.
Yeah.
I mean, and this would be interesting with any couple, but the fact that we're also in the LGBTQ space, right? I think that actually makes it even more of a joy to read because they're writing it and they're not writing it in a way where it feels uncomfortable, because that's one of my pet peeves.
Yeah.
Is when you write something that is outside of a norm and then you can feel the discomfort in the writing. I like the fact that like it's pretty clear amongst the Kree and the Skrull that for them they have a different idea of about how the genders are supposed to relate to each other, where this is really no big deal.
Especially easy for shapeshifters.
Exactly. I mean, and that's also something I always found interesting about superheroes, both Marvel and DC, is like how how you can have certain issues given the fact that people so frequently change genders anyway.
Yeah, well, that I'm not going to dig down into that rabbit hole, but with this specific issue, I will agree. The strongest parts of this book were Wiccan and Hulkling. They were the strongest parts of this book. Their commitment to their roles, their commitment to each other, their commitment to service was the strongest element to me. I was able to. It's funny, some of what you're saying about this relationship is also going on in the strained relationship between Phyla-Vell and Moondragon, but they played that out in some previous issues, and it doesn't gain time here, which is not necessarily a deficit. What's a deficit is the antagonist. It was revealed last issue, and this isn't much of a spoiler, that Dormammu has now essentially eaten Ego, the living planet, and is attacking the galaxy because. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's Dormammu. Yeah, he's got the dark dimension. He's trying to conquer stuff. But he's always very boring. And while it was an interesting visual to have this kind of jack-o'-lantern flaming head covering an entire planet and shooting out little Dormammu balls of his little completely unimportant and without personality snub fighters, a simulacra of himself. I mean,
I thought that was one of the most fun parts about this.
Well, here's the thing.
Seeing I thought visually
cute.
that was amazing.
I thought it was visually cute, but I thought it was thematically empty. Because here's the thing about Dormammu. Dormammu has one defining role: losing. Dormammu can't beat his sister. He can't beat his dad. He can't beat Doctor Strange. He can't beat a JV team at your local high school. Dormammu doesn't win. He simply doesn't, which is one of the problems.
Okay, he may not be able to beat anybody, but he managed to eat Ego the Living Planet, and I got to give him props for that.
Again, and this is the problem with licensed things, if Ego the Living Planet is Dormammu next year, I will give you $20 of my own money. Because I know,
I'll be waiting.
I know for a fact that is not going to be the case. There's too many licensing agreements. There's too much. When you're dealing with big properties, the names can wiggle, but they can't change. That's why you can have Cosmic Ghost Rider, which is Punisher plus Ghost Rider, because it doesn't screw with Punisher or Ghost Rider. He's from the future, time travel, yay! Derivative properties. Because that also means, and from a legal standpoint, you don't have to pay the people who come up with these ideas. So that's why you can have, go on, make Nightwing. Nightwing is not a separate character. Nightwing is a derivative of Robin. So I don't have to pay you for making Nightwing. I don't have to pay you for making any subsequent Robins. I don't have to pay you for any of that crap.
That may be true. But, and I see where you're coming from, but still, you know what? I don't think that makes this any less of a fun book. Another character moment that I actually love was seeing the Super Skrull sitting around being like the master strategist, as opposed to him being out there being cannon fodder with the rest of them. I mean,
don't get me wrong. I don't want to sell you the wrong way. This is an honorable mention book. There's a lot of good things in here. The Hercules stepping into space heroism in a way he hasn't since Bob Layton has really wrote him back in the 80s. I love that.
Right.
There's a lot of really enjoyable things here. But a hero is defined by his opposition. And the opposition here is an empty shirt. In the same way that if you put Wolverine against a bunch of ninjas, or Snake Eyes against a bunch of ninjas, or Daredevil against a bunch of ninjas, or really anybody against a bunch of ninjas, those ninjas don't matter. The fact of their struggle is literally to serve as something to fly through to get to some speechy end where you're going to depose whoever sent them. If you're fielding a group of ninjas, you're probably not going to win, historically speaking. And when I know that, when I'm genre savvy enough to know that, and this isn't just me, my 11-year-old could tell you that. So if that's the case, then the stakes are very low. Oh, you're attacking Skrullos. Do I believe Skrullos is in any major danger? Not really, because I don't really have a relationship with Skrullos. I barely have a relationship with Hala, too. We nuked the whole first Kree homeworld. I don't remember it. I don't remember any great architectural losses from it or any cultural things that I'm mourning the loss of, because we never get to find out. These places are presented as placeholders. These simulacra are presented as just wheat to just cut down with the blade and walk past. And honestly, that's a deficit, despite all the things that I really
basically what you're saying is you need a better villain.
I'm almost always saying we deserve a better grade of villain.
That may be true,
Yeah,
but
with Dollar Tree Baroness in Congress, yeah, I absolutely believe we deserve a better grade of villain.
well, yeah, but I think that's also one of the difficulties once you go out in the cosmic area, because most of the cosmic beings are kind of empty shirts.
I'm sorry, Jim
And it's in
Starlin
part-
has entered the chat. I'm sorry, what?
I'm
sorry,
you
what were
heard
you
what I
saying?
said.
Okay, I'm sorry, you were saying something. Yeah. I'm sorry, early Grant Morrison has stepped into the chat. I'm sorry, what?
Oh,
Do you want me to go
well,
on?
what I'm saying is a lot of these cosmic beings, and I think it's interesting. A lot of the really super powerful beings, it's like they show up, and then through some weird kind of trickery, the heroes win, and it makes them actually seem weaker. Like in some ways, I feel like some of the weaker villains feel stronger in the comics because you see them overcoming, right? I think, and I do kind of agree with you that yeah, the nameless ones, they're just like, they are, just call them cannon fodder, right? No matter how powerful they are cannon fodder. But it's also because it's like, it was so improbable that they would ever lose, and the fact that they've lost so many times kind of undermines them. But then the problem is, if you create a new villain for these, it's like it's hard to be afraid of a new villain because you're like, oh, he's just, you know what I mean? I just think it's hard to do villains in this space.
Well, I have too many examples. Well, I have way too many examples where that's not true, especially if I'm going to look at Far Sector as the first place to do it. N.K. Jemisin entering the chat. But I believe making a villain is, well, let me correct it. Let me step back from that. None of it is easy. I'm a professional writer myself. None of it is easy. But I believe it is worth the work. I believe that doing it matters, and that putting in the work, well, what's his name? Who was it? It was, what was his name? The dude who worked with me on that first Wildfire book. Anyway, this artist that I know, I feel really bad. I'm about to quote him on Twitter. I'm sorry. But Nelson Blake, I believe it was on Twitter saying, if you ask most creators on most big two books if the book that they just turned in is the best work of their career, almost none of them can say yes. If you can ask almost most of them, is this the hardest you've ever worked to make sure this story won? Most of them will not be able to say yes, because they're churning it out because that's their freaking job. And I get that. I've had jobs where I've thrown myself into it and done everything I could, and I've had jobs where I just said, I'm getting it done. I'm turning in the bare minimum. The difference is, in a literary standpoint, in a literary genre, this stuff lives. And with all due respect, if you want to be Chuck Dixon, Chuck Dixon was doing like 10 books a month at one time, and I don't remember any of it. If you want to be that, then that's a decision you can make for your career. But I'd rather do something different. And I believe a lot of writers either cannot or will not make that decision, partially based on the money, partially knowing that they're not going to get paid, partially knowing that the business structure is set up against them. And that's my beat. I'm not saying Al Ewing is making that decision here. I'm saying that, Dormammu, the Living Planet, I think you can do better.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. I still recommend it though.
Yeah, remember, he's the guy who turned Galactus into the Life Bringer. He's the guy who who remixes Galactus. That was an idea. But
Okay, well
this is retrograde.
let's do a quick let's do a quick take on on at least the last Marvel book I wanted to talk about, which is New Mutants.
Okay. Uh, I think it's well. The cover's a lie, first of all, because I don't think the Shadow King is anywhere in this book.
Right.
They talk about him, they reference his efforts, but I don't actually think he's in the book.
But
And
it looks beautiful.
oh yeah, super gorgeous cover, no doubt, no doubt. But I just this group of New Mutants doesn't intrigue me. Their desire for independence outside the structure of Krakoa seems sloppy and inconsistent with a lot of the things they're doing. And ultimately, their lack of understanding how even the basic mechanics of Krakoan resurrection works, I think, is a deficit. I think it's a problem here.
Yeah, I mean, as I was looking at it, I was just thinking to myself, okay, mutants, island, they come back to life, and the big problem is that somebody's dead.
Yeah,
Oh.
try harder.
I mean, I do like New Mutants. I think that it's been one of the stronger books, but I feel like by the time I hit this week, I've just started to get bored.
Yep.
And I think that that's part of the problem is that they've introduced a whole bunch of interesting issues with these new mutant laws and all this stuff, and every book is trying to grapple with them to the point where I just feel like I'm just caught in this morass of everybody using story as a new form of conjecture.
Yes. Yeah. That it turns into a sequence of events, which does not make a plot. A sequence of
Right.
events is not a plot. It's just a sequence of events. That's not the same thing.
Exactly. I mean, yeah. I mean, and I'm sad to have to say that, but dag,
Yeah.
you know. But let's leave the big two and let's go to a more interesting space. How about Time Before Time?
Let's do that. I would like that. I have been a big fan of what Declan Shalvey has been doing with this book and a lot of the ideas that are put forth. I thought this issue was a little slower than some of the others because they really needed to dig into this one specific plot element and conquer it. And I like what ultimately happened. I just, there were so many ideas thrown at me in the previous issues that this one felt a little lighter. This one felt like, oh, I don't have that many things to present to you. The things I have are great, and they're absolutely great, but it's just not as much. The density of data wasn't as much, and I kind of wanted a little more in that regard. And not so much that I wouldn't say I wouldn't buy this book, because I would buy this book. This book is worth buying, but I don't know if I'd say it's as strong as the previous issues.
Well, this is issue number 3. It's heavy on exposition.
Yeah.
Really heavy on exposition, which is kind of the opposite of the other ones.
Yeah.
The other ones they did a better job of balancing the showing and the telling.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say this is the worst of the Time Before Time books, issue number 3. But this issue number 3, being the worst of the Time Before Time books, is still better than all the Marvel and DC books I read this week. So
That is correct.
And I mean that, and I do mean that actually as a compliment, right? Like what they've done is they have a couple of things they did really important is they really stuck to the world that they're in.
Yes.
And I feel like they strengthened the building of the world and they figured out what things need to be repeated and what things we don't need to go back to,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that they were missing a moment like in the last one. Remember where he meets his friend who's now super old and his friend has taken a pill
Oh,
that will
that was
kill him when he goes to
heartbreaking.
sleep.
Yes.
Yeah, there's something about that. That was not just heartbreaking. That really freaked me out.
Yeah.
Like that's the ultimate horror. I was like, why would someone kill themselves that way? Where when you go that if you get tired and go to sleep for any reason, that's it.
Yeah. Time travel is
So what
wild.
if you don't finish everything on your to-do list that day?
I mean,
It's like it's just like okay.
you can say that about any death.
Well, yeah, but there's something about it coming in that way, coming in the form of sleep, coming in the form of rest.
Yeah.
That's yeah. I did not find that comforting at all.
Nor should it be.
and maybe that's just my own my own psychological baggage, but you know, um, I I also think the art in this is gorgeous.
Yeah,
I
I'm a
love
fan.
the art, and you know what I really love is I love the coloring.
Yes. It makes the most important things pop out from the background, and the things that are not as important, you're able to see the distinction, and that's hard to do. And I've seen it; it's super hard to do in shading and whatnot. But I think this does it really well. There's a great panel where the two main characters are super surprised that I swear to God I wanted to make a poster. That was amazing to me. I really enjoyed because that moment was captured. They were like, because when that happened, they were not prepared for it, and you really got to feel that reaction more than just see it.
Right.
And I was like, oh, that's very well done.
And the other thing that's nice about it is that he did this with very traditional coloring.
Yep.
Very traditional coloring with just rich flat colors. No complex shading, just these rich flat colors, blues and yellows and oranges and reds. There's not a lot of green here, which is my favorite color, so I wish there was more of that, but you know, I guess beggars can be choosers, damn it. Um,
Yeah.
I actually love the colors.
Sometimes the
Like
old
I,
ways are best.
yep. You know, I mean, this is ironically this is an incredibly simple comic,
But
and
it's an
this is a
incredibly
comic that's a
layered comic.
exactly. In other words, it is it sometimes simplicity wins the day.
Yes.
And just because you're able to lay things out in a simple fashion, sometimes that's harder than complexity.
Yeah.
And maintaining and the simplicity of I love the simplicity of the lines, the shapes, the colors. I love that there's not a I actually love that there's very few instances of like actual like like gradient type shadow. It's either black or it's a color.
Yeah.
It's that simple. I love I think that the lettering works really well.
Yeah.
I love it's just simple things. Even like one thing I thought was also really good was just the simple placement of word balloons.
Yeah.
You
There's a
know,
lot of
I
really good
mean,
choices.
it's like this is all about the success of the basics.
Well, I mean, and as a longtime Tim Duncan fan, I totally appreciate mastering the fundamentals. I've always said it's harder to do a good haiku than it is to do a good novel. Because you talked often about the degree of difficulty. That's where it comes in with brevity.
Right.
We're running out of time. This is Comic Books This Week. Dr. Stanford Carpenter, comics anthropologist, and myself, Hannibal Tabu, head comics reviewer at Bleeding Cool. Any last thoughts you want to do before we roll out, Stanford?
I struggle with Dark Blood. I'm still trying to figure out what that's about.
I'm
I'm
holding my comments on that.
really.
I'm not speaking publicly yet. I'm still trying to figure my thoughts out as well.
Okay. I am gonna come back for the next one though. But yeah, that's one that there's some interesting stuff going on in there, but I'm having a little trouble placing it.
Well, we'll see if it does a little better next week, or next month rather. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Please join the It's Complicated Club by clicking the greenhouse over my head. We'll be back next week. We're a little early this week, and we will have this on YouTube by probably Friday or Saturday. You'll be able to have this whole set of reviews as we've done them on YouTube. Thank you so much. Check for us next week. All right, be safe, y'all.
All right, see ya.